So welcome, friends. I'm John, Father John Deere, and very happy to welcome you to this Beatitude Center for the Nonviolent Jesus Zoom special with a very special guest today, my friend, Brother Paul Quenon from the Abbey of Gethsemani in Kentucky. So first, let me ask everyone to mute themselves. And if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat. And I really hope you'll ask Brother Paul, some questions. It's wonderful. And on Monday, we will send out the recording of the Zoom to everybody if you want to watch it again. So you all get it again. If for some reason you don't get it, just write to the Beatitude Center. Brother Paul is going to speak for 30 minutes or so, I hope longer. And depending then, I'm going to ask him some questions. Paul and I are going to have a little dialogue for maybe up to 15 minutes. And then we're going to open up to everybody for your questions and comments and reflections with our guest. And so the whole thing will go about an hour and a half, God willing. So I invite us all to take a moment and we're going to have a little prayer and then I'll introduce Paul. So if you want to just take a deep breath and notice how you're feeling this morning, and I invite you just to relax and to be at peace wherever you are with whatever's happening, and I'll offer a little prayer. But again, I invite you into the presence of the God of peace who loves you infinitely. And let's welcome the nonviolent Jesus and his Holy Spirit into our hearts, into our circle, into our world, and ask for whatever graces of peace we need for ourselves this morning and for our church, all the churches, and our poor world. God of peace, be with us now as we reflect with our friend, Brother Paul, on the call to live in your peace, the call of poverty of spirit and humility, prayer, and living in the present moment, surrendering to you, all of that call to peace. Bless us now and always as we try to continue the journey to follow the nonviolent Jesus, the journey of gospel peacemaking and gospel nonviolence. Help us all to be your beatitude people, your beloved sons and daughters, your holy peacemakers, in Jesus' name, amen. We're gathering this morning as the war on Ukraine continues, and but we're all really aware that the whole world is a world of permanent war. It's a war against the poor, war against the children, war against the creatures, the war on Mother Earth. It's the war of greed and domination, empire, nuclear weapons, environmental destruction. And so we're grieving that all of this violence, and that's why we continue to turn to the nonviolent Jesus, who offers the best alternative, this vision of nonviolence and the way and truth and life of nonviolence. And there's so many ways to look at the life of peace. And it's so exciting to be with Paul today for those of you who have been regular on these Zooms, and we've heard so many different angles. Like imagine, I don't know if you were there with Reverend Jim Lawson, Dr. King's teacher, to Rajmohan Gandhi and Robert Ellsberg and Marie Dennis. Now we're going to hear another angle, if you will. That's the way I look at it, on the life of peace. So Brother Paul is a Trappist monk from the Abbey of Gethsemani. He entered the monastery when he was 18, I think, in 1959, which is 62 years ago, which means, Paul, you entered when I was born. I'm exactly 62 years. This summer will be 63. Paul's novice master was Thomas Merton, who became his mentor and friend. And at the Abbey of Gethsemani, which I hope we've all been there, it's near Bardstown, Kentucky, still there, thriving. I first visited there, the invitation of our friend, Brother Patrick Hart, in the 1980s, and met Paul then. And I made a retreat there once or twice a year, almost until the pandemic. So I consider Gethsemani my monastery. Paul's probably the best known monk right now from the Abbey of Gethsemani. He's a poet and the author of 10 books, including his most recent collection called Amounting to Nothing, and his memoir, these fantastic titles, Paul, is called In Praise of a Useless Life, which won the Catholic Press Award for the best memoir of 2019. And maybe later, Paul, you can tell us where to get your books. I'm sure they're all at Amazon. When I wrote to Paul last fall and invited him to do this Zoom, he offered this provocative title, The Art of Amounting to Nothing, a poetic exploration of poverty of spirit, meditation, and peace, which I just think is so beautiful and provocative and radical, because everybody's trying to amount to something. And Paul's saying, no, the art is to amount to nothing. And, you can take it in so many ways, because it's epitomized, trying to be somebody, to control and dominate the world. We see, let's say, in Putin and Trump, and all of that drive to power, the power of violence is in all of us. And Paul is going to invite us instead to the art of amounting to nothing. And I think he's talking about the very first beatitude. In other words, the first sentence of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount is poverty of spirit. And Paul's going to, expect him to, I don't know what he's going to say, unpack poverty of spirit, humility, and silence. So it's a real blessing to have my friend here with us, live from the Abbey of Gethsemani. And he's going to be missing his prayer period. And I hope he doesn't get reprimanded from the abbot like Merton would in the old days. But how about a big round of applause, even though you're all muted, with a show of hands, to welcome Brother Paul with us. And later, please ask Paul lots of questions. So Paul, the floor is yours. A very warm welcome. You're among friends here. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you. I am honored by the invitation Father John gave me to be with you. Thank you. And thank you for being here and bringing your attention. I must clarify the title of this presentation, The Art of Amounting to Nothing. No one can amount to nothing by their own art or by any human effort. Of that, I will speak in a moment. I will speak rather of the art or poetry concerned with amounting to nothing, or what might be experienced as such. The first example that might come to mind, because so many people learn it in high school, is the little confession by Emily Dickinson. I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell. They'll advertise, you know. How dreary to be somebody. How public, like a frog, to tell your name the livelong June to an admiring bog. Part of the charm of this question offered us is it invites us into a shared intimacy of amounting to nobody. At least we can be nobody to one another. And it is just between the two of us. And meanwhile, it expresses a relief at not being somebody. The poem has a tinge of monastic preference for remaining in the shade. It is this streak of monastic reclusion that attracts me to Emily Dickinson. I find her a kindred spirit, as did Thomas Merton. I doubt she would be very keen on going onto Zoom to talk to somebody, though. A nobody, in other words, is somebody who amounts to nothing. Immediately, you might ask, how can anybody amount to nothing? We are children of God, created in the image and likeness of God. This is the basis of Christian self-esteem, which is necessary to true humility. You cannot have one without the other. It is precisely this state of being gifted as a person in my personhood being a gift from God. To acknowledge that is humility. For that reason, it is not something I can devise of my own, by my art or any contrivance. I wrote of this in the introductory poem to my book of poems, Amounting to Nothing. The title, yeah, there we are. I don't know if you can see it. Probably the light is too strong.
Yeah, it's too blurry, Paul. You can't.
Blurry, okay. Is that better?
Yeah. A little better.
Yeah. The title of the poem is Mad Monk's Life Ambition, which is an unabashed cue from Wendell Berry, who has several poems, the Mad Farmers, the Mad Farmer poems. So let me read that. Sorry monk that I am, I never amounted to nothing. Did somebody lay a jinx on me and say, you'll never amount to nothing? How sad. Since I took nothing as my monastic goal, I still don't amount to nothing, still think I'm something. I hardly amount to a hill of beans, but that is already too much of something. Whatever might you amount to nothing, where is that magical mountain, where that weird agility to climb a hill of humus, humility so grounded it ascends by descending, a humility that does not know it is a virtue. When I find it, if I ever do, comparing something to nothing will cease. Any measure or judgment of my own itself amounts to nothing. Now this has two allusions, one to the rule of Saint Benedict with his 12 degrees of humility. And his statement at the beginning of the chapter is that we ascend, humility is a ladder. It's 12 steps, but it's a ladder we ascend by descending. So there's that paradox. And there also is this line in which I steal fair and clean from Blessed Garrick of Igny, who is a Cistercian father of the 12th century. And he's the one in his homily on humility, he says that humility is the root and basis of all virtues, but humility does not know it is a virtue. And it makes me think of the Father Arseni, a very holy Romanian Orthodox monk who was a confessor and was imprisoned by the Nazis and by the communists in Romania and suffered terrible cold and beatings and so forth. And somebody asked him, he survived all of that, and he died, I think it was a year or two ago. Do you know if you're humble? And he said, if I say I'm humble, I'm not humble. If I think I'm humble, I am not humble. So I don't know if I'm humble or not. I like that. So getting back to the rule of St. Benedict, as a monk who follows the rule of St. Benedict, I profess to take seriously the steps of humility, but as it so defines. But each one of these steps I hold in view of the line in Psalm 50, which says, a humble, contrite heart, create for me, O God. Create for me, O God. It is God who creates a broken heart. And according to a Hasidic tradition, the only true prerequisite for prayer is a broken heart. The only true prerequisite for prayer is a broken heart. Now, given the situation in Ukraine, we are undergoing an experience of a broken heart. At least that is how I find it to be. Some are experiencing an angry heart. Some a heart in despair. Few, if any, with a perfect heart. Be perfect, Jesus said, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you or anybody, that you may be children of your Father in heaven, who causes the sun to rise on evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. How can you watch apartment buildings being shelled and citizens targeted and do this forgiveness? That is where my heart proves itself broken. So what do? That is where the word create is so important. A humble, broken heart, create for me, O God. In my helplessness, I am already broken. And that is at least the beginning of the creation of a humbled heart. I really can't handle this situation, handle it on my own. I have to get help from beyond. Every day there are prayers in our choir for people in Ukraine and Putin as well. Above all, he needs prayer. And think of the poor Russian soldiers who wake up in the bad situation they find themselves in. This broken heart, the heart that is not functioning right, even less perfectly, is in fact the nothing, the chaos out of which God creates everything. A poem by Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore, is a good illustration. It states with such it starts with such a chaotic heart. And this poem actually is from the Gitanjali, but it is a new rendition by Coleman Barks, who you may know as one of the great translators of Rumi the Persian. His book is The Open Secret, I believe. It's a rather thick book of poems and he has turned in his later years to Tagore and updated the language and made it, contemporary and direct. I memorized several of these poems, and I was happy to see at the book launch was at the Speed Museum in Louisville, in which he launched his book, and then they launched, Fons Vitae launched the new book, Merton and Hinduism. So to my satisfaction, Coleman Barks read the very poem which I was most impressed with in the whole book. And so here's how it goes. Full of many kinds of desiring, my crying out remains confused and pitiful. You save me with hard, definite refusals. And the strength of that mercy has given my life a shape that makes me worthy of the great, simple gifts you have given, marked unasked for. The sky, the light, this body, my mind. These are what save me from excessive desire. I am sometimes lazy, unfocused, distracted. Other times, I wake up and move with speed. You coldly hide yourself in both cases, preparing me for your presence by withholding it, and so saving me from what is most destructive, weak, uncertain love. Well, this deals with one of the basic mysteries. Why does God hide himself? And Merton's friend, Rabbi Zalman Schachter, asked himself that. He was very perplexed by that in his young years when he was a teenager. And he was going down the street thinking about this, and it came to him. God hides himself so that we may love truly, so that we may love firmly. This is where meditation is so important. It conditions you for that apparent cold, hard refusal that prepares me for God's presence by withholding it. Merton wrote of this in a most radical way in his poem, Gelassenheit. It is a poem rife with paradox, one that tries to delve to that core of chaos that is the flashpoint of creation. So this is it's a rather long poem, and it's not an easy poem to take in. It's full of paradoxes, but I think it says just about everything. Gelassenheit. That's German name. Sometimes it's translated as releasement or freedom. Desert and void. The uncreated is waste and emptiness to the creature. Not even sand, not even stone, not even darkness and night. A burning wilderness would at least be something. It burns and is wild, but the uncreated is no something. Waste, emptiness, total poverty of the Creator. Yet from this poverty springs everything. The waste is inexhaustible, infinite zero. Everything comes from this desert nothing. Everything wants to return to it and cannot. For who can return nowhere? But for each of us, there is a point of nowhereness in the middle of movement, a point of nothingness in the midst of being, the incomparable point not to be discovered or not to be discovered by insight. If you seek it, you do not find it. If you stop seeking, it is there. But you must not turn to it. Once you become aware of yourself, as a seeker, you are lost. But if you are content to be lost, you will be found without knowing it, precisely because you are lost. At last, for you at last are nowhere. That's a lot. That's a lot to take in. After all that having been said, this is not an easy poem to read or understand. What can it tell us about meditation? What about the feeling of being lost with meditation or anything and everything? I will share with you 3 of my own poems that bear upon this problem. They may or may not be the same problem, or only be something akin. I will take this from the new book which came out called How to Be. It's a collection of letters.
Hold it farther back.
Further back.
Yeah. Oh, that's not helping either.
Not helping at all, no.
Yeah.
Okay. Put it next to my face. How's that?
Your face looks great, but the poem doesn't.
Oh, yeah, it doesn't come out. The light's not right. Anyhow, it's a collection of letters between myself and Judith Valente, who's had a stellar career in journalism. Washington Post and Wall Street Journal and Chicago Herald Tribune, NPR and PBS. And now she's retired, and she's a Benedictine oblate. And we wrote this series of letters, which is available at Amazon, just as the Amounting to Nothing is. And let me read this and we'll get to the poem. I usually spend 30 or 40 minutes after Mass in mindful meditation, trying to stay present to the moment. This is one of the easiest as well as hardest practices, because I tend to fall asleep or get restless. As I have learned from experience, I drift off because I am bored with my own mind. Meditation is not hard as long as I do what I sat down to do, which is to stay present to the presence. Then I can stay focused or empty or alert or content with just being there. Recently, there was a period of about 2 weeks when my meditation seemed dead. My spiritual director told me, "You don't know what is going on. Maybe that is the way the Lord wants it. Maybe Christ comes in his poverty and abandonment. And that is what I am experiencing as my own poverty. So it seems best just to let it alone, to take comfort in the faith that I just don't know what is going on." I wrote a poem earlier this year named Discontent that bears upon this point. I step outside after Mass to my prayer nook with vague discontent. The clouded sky shows earlier light. The winter solstice, 7 days past. The temperature's milder, the air fragrant, birds are sounding, but none of this satisfies. I sit and hold on to discontent, indisposed for prayer, indisposed for anything else. After a while, my inability speaks from its poverty. Nothing within human capacity could ever be adequate for prayer. Truth alone is of any real worth. Let the truth of this moment, then, my discontent, be my prayer. On December the 10th, the anniversary of Thomas Merton's death, a fellow monk quoted a passage of his that really speaks of this point here. Merton says, "Christ always seeks the straw of the most desolate cribs to make his Bethlehem." I can dismiss that as self-comfort talk, or I can take it in faith as being true to everything I know of Christ. Even when meditation and quiet sitting seem to be of no evident worth, I know I would not want to be doing anything else. It is the only right thing for the time being. The second poem has something of the same transformation of attitude. It has to do with dukkha, suffering, or dissatisfaction. I think it's Japanese, or at least a Zen word for dissatisfaction. Why does this grip of dissatisfaction take hold of me? I would shake it free, but no, wait. Take it in hand. Keep as yours Hold it lightly, palm open. A common coin, worn smooth, passed through many hands. The bus token, admission for a ride unto what destination? Dissatisfaction is all of what you are. Hold it as of yours to give. It is your raw element, pitch blend, yielding radium. Give it to me. Mine is dissatisfaction from time immemorial, the substance of everything I ever brought into being. This, for me, was a daring poem because it introduces the voice of the Lord at the middle, something I always avoided. Likewise, in the third poem I will read, it signifies a transformation in the frustration of and in helplessness. It's called Helpless with Nothing. I cannot bring you even my nothingness, which of all things to be born is the lightest. I only bring this deplorable clutter of mind, a languid slump thing into opaque sloth. There, I meet your care, your endless reserve of knowing not, meet your forgetfulness, wherein my nothingness can take its rest to make me over anew. Day after day, I must confess, I proved no success in meditation. Perhaps it is the way given me in the church by God to share the helplessness and the poverty of people in the world who have it far worse. The people in Ukraine or Yemen or El Salvador living in an impossible situation. Watching world news on YouTube leaves me mute and benumbed. It is not something to escape, but something to stay with in church, at least for a while. It is Christ who bears all this pain in the world. I know only a sliver of it. Let me conclude with some salient words by Thomas Merton from New Seeds of Contemplation. It's chapter 36 on inward destitution. Strangely, it is in this helplessness that we come upon the beginning of joy. We discover that as long as we stay still, the pain is not so bad, and there is even a certain peace, a certain richness, a certain strength, a certain companionship that makes itself present to us when we are beaten down and lie flat with our mouths in the dust, hoping for hope. Then, as peace settles upon the soul, and we accept what we are and what we are not, we begin to realize that this great poverty is our greatest fortune. For when we are stripped of the riches that are not ours and could not possibly endow us with anything but trouble, when we rest even from the good and licit activity of knowing and desiring, which still could not give us any possession, go think back to Tagore, any possession of our true end and happiness, then we become aware that the whole meaning of our life is a poverty and emptiness, which, far from being a defeat, are really the pledge of all the great supernatural gifts of which they are a potency. Our greatest sorrow is to find we still attach ourselves to ourselves, can be great in our eyes, for we have begun to know that any shadow cast upon this transparency of a pure and empty soul is an illusion and an obstacle to the unadulterated light of God. So I'll end it with that. I think Merton seems to bring together something that maybe, hopefully, all of us have experienced sometime in our life.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. How about a show of hands to thank Paul for sharing with us?